The Skymaster 1/5 scale F-16 in Israeli Air Force scheme continues. We are continuing the back end, moving our way forward. We've got wires to sort out, pipes to install, and the monster turbine to install in this episode. So let's dive in. All right, last episode we finished up with our stabs and vertical, horizontal. We've got to first deal with our mess in the back end. All of that stuff needs to be run forward. Tomorrow, Joe's showing up from RC Custom 3D Printing with our tanks, our smoke tanks that are going in here. And we can get started on the turbine install, bypass install, smoke tank install, all that stuff that goes in this area. So we got lots to do. Let's get started. First thing we're going to do is sort out our wiring. So we need to make sure everything's labeled. We've got a couple wire leads here that are not done yet, so we need to shrink tube those and label them for what they are. So this one's like the rudder, the top of the rudder, and get those guys dealt with. So let's get this on the stand in a comfortable spot and keep on working. All right, so all of our mess is sorted here now on the back end. We've got everything so far ready to run forward. Now, the last thing we have to do in this section here is we've got our air lines there for our air brakes. Now we've got to tee up those guys, and we're just going to run one of the lines forward. So what we're probably going to do, I'm thinking, is we're going to bundle all of this stuff together, run it down one side maybe. This is just me thinking out loud. We'll run it down one side and just have one heat-proof run coming along the engine here, maybe down this side like that. That's going to be the safest way, I think, to make sure that everything is run away from everything, but we'll see. Before we do that, I got the heat shrink installed on our wire leads there for our lights, these lights right here. And we got to tee up our air lines now. So we're using Festo tees there, and then we're going to take that line and we're going to run that line forward to probably towards the front of the aircraft all the way. Okay, so just doing a little bit of pipe fitting, engine fitting, rail fitting, trying to come up with our solutions here. So I'm going to give you an overview, and then I will detail these things as we go through them. So a couple reinforcements that we're going to do in this engine section. So number one, we're going to put a layer of carbon fiber on top of our engine rails. That's going to do a couple things. Number one, this engine needs to sit up a little bit higher to be centered with the pipe. So that carbon's going to take up 3 millimeters of difference, which is perfect. The other thing is this engine rail is only mounted with one single screw right there. That goes into a block attached to this former right in this section. Well, we're going to add another block underneath the back of the engine rail, and that is going to allow us to put a screw through the back side of the engine rail down into that block. The other thing that we need to do is make sure we have enough space in between our engine and our former work for our bypass, or bottom part of our bypass, which in this case we do. There's enough space between the engine and that rail, or the former work. And then the other reason I was doing this was I was getting the pipe lined up to the back end. There's built-in tabs or L brackets on the pipe, and I was just seeing where those would go in relation to the engine rails. And essentially those blocks mount exactly on the engine rails. So what we need to do is then attach blocks on the back side here of this main former, and that is going to be our pipe mount for the pipe or bell mouth. So I think as a first step here, we're going to get our rails out, our engine rails, and we're going to work on getting our carbon reinforcer done up and glued onto the engine rails. So step number one, we cut out some 3 millimeter carbon plate, and this is going to be high soled onto our engine rails. So we're going to take the underside to the sander, and we're going to get that roughened up, and then we are going to high sol these in place. Paying attention to the back here because our interlocking tab needs to be like that so it doesn't interfere. And then once this is cured tomorrow, we'll just sand the edges down because it's just a hair bigger. I did it just a hair bigger than the engine rail, and then we'll just sand down this little area right there. Now the reason I didn't go past all the way is because this is just to hold the tank in. The actual support comes to about here with the screw hole, so we're going to go a little bit past, but it doesn't need to be the entire length of the engine rail, and this also saves carbon material. This stuff is very expensive to get these plates, so I was able to cut these pieces out widthwise versus lengthwise, which this would have taken almost the entire thing and it would have been a waste. So just being mindful of conserving this stuff. All right, so working on the engine install, actually working on the pipe install. We've got to get the pipe set up first before we can do anything else. So I've spent a bunch of time, I just pulled everything out of here, spent a bunch of time with the engine in the aircraft, on the rails, with stuff underneath the pipe, trying to get everything organized. And I think I have it sorted out. So these are going to be our pipe mounts, and they are going to go on the back side right like this. And this is all going to be, number one, glued together, but then our extra supports for our engine rails are going to get glued on this side, and those will get all bolted or screwed together. So that's going to be nice and strong. But essentially, I was just figuring out the height that we need to go at here. So our openings on our mounts there that these guys plug into, basically we're going to run the top line right at the bottom of our rail opening, and that's going to leave 3 millimeters, which is our thickness of our carbon plate, on top, and that's going to make for perfect pipe spacing. So hopefully that makes some sort of sense, but I'm just kind of sharing all the technical side of things with you. It's pretty difficult doing this stuff to just like glue the engine rails together and mount the engine when you don't have the pipe mounted, because you need the pipe mounted in order to get the engine in the right spot, because you need to get your engine spacing proper. So there's just a whole bunch of stuff going on here. And the way these pipes work with the big bell mouth is you've got your pipe like this, and you've got your big bell mouth here. Now I don't know the dimensions yet, I haven't measured it, but let's just say this is, I don't know, 3 inches. Is your total dimension here. You basically want your cone on the 50%, your cone of your engine on the 50% mark. So basically what you're looking for is this to be 1.5 inches, that to be 1.5 inches. So that's why we need to get the pipe mounted first, because then we can do our measurements and get our engine inserted the right depth. But first of all, we got to get the pipe mounted, engine centered and everything, and that there's a lot of figuring going on here. Okay, so we've got our pipe just resting on our mounts right now, which is perfect. So that is in the final spot, not screwed in place yet. We've reinstalled the engine, just kind of got it roughly placed where it needs to go. And we are bang on perfection. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to figure out the holes. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to put some holes in our mounts on the pipe first, and then we're going to mark out where they're going to go on our wood mount, and then we'll get those guys drilled out on the wood mount next. So it's going to be a bit of a chore. So at this point, lots of engine ins and outs, but I think that is perfect. Well, and magically we have the Unilite afterburner ring that arrived. This is the crazy ultra power ring with the overdrive. We've got the controller, of course, and the spreader diffuser ring. So this is going to be added to the aircraft. We knew this was coming. I don't know if the owner knew it was coming, but anyways, it's here and it's going to be awesome. So we'll set that aside, and once we get the back end kind of tied up, then we'll get that installed. We have already planned for this by running wires to the back end for the afterburner. Okay, so we're going to yank that pipe out because we have no access to drill our holes. We have marked our holes there, and but we got to get the pipe out of the back to be able to drill those holes. So we got our holes drilled in our L brackets for our pipe. Location really doesn't matter, but you just need to be able to access these screws when the pipe is installed. So that's fairly tight. So we want to hug it towards the bell mouth itself. So those are done. Now before we install our pipe, we kind of need to do everything in the back end that needs to go in place. So first thing I'm going to do here is get our ventral fins set up. Now the ventral fins on this model are keyholed, which is very nice. All right, so a couple interesting things here. What we've done is I've taken the wires for everything in the vertical stab, run them down in between those two channels right there. We've got a balsa block up there. We've got a matching one down there. So we've run everything behind the balsa blocks. On this side there, we've got our black air line, which goes to our chute mechanism. And those are going to be run forward all together, so that just gets them out of the way. We're going to put some spiral wrap on this side, and then we're going to completely cover this entire area with tin foil, and that's going to the sticky foil, and that's going to protect our lines and everything. So just mainly focusing on heat protection back here and just keeping everything as far away from the pipe as possible. All this stuff in the center here, that's all forward of that this former work, so that'll come down below the pipe and work its way forward. I'll show you guys the next steps here once we get there. All right, guys, and like normal, we are going to be jumping all over the place a little bit just because of the stuff going on in the back end. I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So we're working on the wiring and running the tubes and everything right now. Now, when we get into this part of the back end right here, this is where our flap servo comes out, and that needs to be dealt with. So there are some things like we can't put our pipe in until we get our flap servo in, which goes right here. So we will be working through the entire back end here and kind of going all over the place. So I'm kind of just working on getting the smoke tanks laid out here, and I think I have a good plan for that. But before we do anything with the smoke tanks, we need to get our engine rails figured out here. So we did glue these a few weeks ago. This plane's been on hold for a little while, and we used some 9462 high sol to glue our carbon onto our wood. Now we need to even out our edges a little bit and get our angle here that sits against our fuel tank, get that sanded out as well. So we'll just take these to the belt sander and get those all cleaned up. We'll probably have to take our Dremel to clean up our little notches here so they actually sit in properly. But we want to get those 100% cleaned up so we can get those installed against the smoke tanks to see how everything fits. All right, so we've got our rails done here. Now the point of doing these rails now is to find out where we can install our smoke fittings on our tanks. That's really the reason. And then the other thing we need to do is we're putting an additional block under the rear portion of the rail. So we made up these aircraft blocks, and 2 of them are back here where our pipe mounts to, and then we're going to have 2 going underneath this rail, and the rail is also going to be screwed into this block. And then what we'll do is we'll take a bolt and we'll fasten all of this stuff together. So we'll drill a hole through our front blocks, our back blocks where our pipe's mounting to, and that'll get all bolted together and sandwich the former work here. So this will all be solid, no way for that to come off, and that should work great. So what I'm going to do now is figure out our path for our smoke tanks. So I don't want to run these smoke tanks in parallel, meaning that I don't want them to both pull to a T-fitting. What I want to do is run them in series. So when we fill these smoke tanks, we're going to have a little mini UAT mounted somewhere in the front. So that's going to come to here. We're going to fill up through our fill fitting. That's going to come out the vent to the other tank, fill up that tank, and then exit out the aircraft. So conceivably on smoke tank number 1, we could have our pull fitting from tank number 2, we could have our pull fitting from the bottom of the tank and not even use a clunk line, because if we get a little bit of air getting sucked through that line, we're still going to have fuel in the first tank or middle tank. Anyways, I'm going to work on that, get that all figured out, and figure out how we're going to run our bung systems and all that stuff on these smoke tanks. All right, so we got these really nice BVM fittings here to use for our smoke system, and they're going to work out really well. So what we need to do is we need to get our bung fitting mounted kind of on the angle here. So if we go straight like this, we're going to run into the primary fuel tank, which is right in front of this guy. So the nice thing about these small fittings is we've got a nice small through fitting on the tank. So we're going to get this kind of mounted on the angle just like that. So I'm going to drill a hole here on the angle and get that sized. The actual pickup has an O-ring that goes here, seals against the bung, and then we're going to have a clunk. So we're going to do the same setup on both sides, and then we've got our vent line, which is going to go right like this, and we're going to angle that. Instead of going straight forward and backwards, we're going to go a little bit of an angle towards the outside of the plane. Now the point of that is we've got a hole
through our former work right here where my finger is, and we can have our vent line come through there, go down underneath the bypass, lower portion here, so it's going to come under and then go to the other side of the tank. So that'll be a nice way to route our lines. Okay, so we've got our holes done up in our tanks. You can see we've marked our tanks right and left, up, down, forward, whatever. And we've got our vent lines matched up here as well too. So both of those tanks are done equal, and the fittings go in there nice. So what we'll do now is we're going to rinse our tanks out now at this point. It's easier to get all the alcohol out now and before we put our fitting in, just to get rid of the dust and stuff in there. So we'll give these a rinse with rubbing alcohol, and then we're going to roughen up the area around our gluing surface. So we'll take our Dremel, just roughen that area up, this area up. And the other thing I do is I take my actual bung fitting and I will roughen up the surface of the brass fitting here, and that'll help the high sol to stick to that. And then our vent line, which are these guys here, they're threaded, so that's fine, but the roughening up the area where these get installed to on there is important as well. And we've got our fittings installed in our tanks. They turned out perfect, exactly what we're looking for. And a little plug here for the smoke tank. So if you're building one of these F-16s, 1/5 scale Skymaster ones, and you want a set of these smoke tanks, they fit perfectly behind the CG or right on the CG. Check out Joe from RC Custom 3D Printing. He did these smoke tanks and they are awesome, and that's where you can pick them up if you're interested in a set. Okay, so the point of doing all that measuring is so we can put the engine in the fuselage and we can get our cutouts done on our engine rails. Now our engine's a little bit wider than, well, the bolts are wider than our rails, so we've got to make little cutouts there. So I've marked the engine straps front and back with a paint marker, and we can do our little notches in the engine rails so the engine will now sit down properly. We've got our notches cut out here in our engine rails, and our engine is now sitting down nicely. When we look from the underside there, if you look against the former underneath the engine, we've got a nice even space all the way around, which is perfect for our bypass. And then we've spent a bit of time organizing our wires in the back end here. So we've got all of our wires run into snakeskin. We've got some keepers and stuff in place to keep all the wires down low. Now we're not done here. We're going to do some aluminum tape work and everything, but we can't really go any further forward with this stuff until we get our servos for our wings figured out. So that's kind of the next step that we need to get done, because we want to have all of our wiring from this back end run forward before we do any mounting with the engine. So we're going to get the wiring pulled out, the engine pulled out, and start working on our flap servos. Okay, so we're adding some extensions to our afterburner wires. So I've cut these off, left about a foot on the actual afterburner itself. We'll put a connector between this guy and the afterburner piece, and then we're going to add basically almost double, well actually a little more than double the stock length. Now the stock Unilite lighting wire is very heat resistant, so it's got a silicone sheath. And this is Swiwen wire, which goes between the engine and the ECU, and this also is very heat resistant, so that's why we're using this material. Okay, so afterburner light is basically ready to install. There's a couple things I'll do here in preparation. First thing is we're going to put some shoe goop over top of our wire mounts here. Now that just helps with vibration and just keeps the wires from vibrating on the solder joints. And you can see here we've added our servo connectors, and on our wires that power the afterburner light, we've got the other end as well. So that's ready to install. I'm going to put a little bit of shoe goop on there. That is perfect. Okay, so a couple changes here that we made with the engine rails. So you can now see the cutout that we did for the engine. So that allows the bolts of the engine strap just to drop in beside this, this engine rail. We've got a little bit of adjustment side to side, a little bit of adjustment forward and backwards, but we're pretty solid and fixed there. What I did was I countersunk the screw. So previously the screw was just sitting on top of the plywood engine mount, which it still technically is. We just drilled a hole to receive the head in the carbon plate. They also threaded the wood here. We put a blind nut on the bottom. So next thing we'll do now that we're at this point is we're going to pull these engine rails back out, drill a hole through here, get these guys mounted, and then once these guys are done and glued in place, because we're going to glue these blocks onto the former work here, once that's done, then we will move on to our servos for our flaps. All right, so we've got stuff fairly well organized back here, as long as you don't look any further forward than that. So that mess there is everything that's going to be going forward. But as far as our back end here goes, everything is run in place. These are our lines for our afterburner lights. So our wires are going to come off our afterburner and plug into those guys there. So what we'll do now is we're going to cover this entire area here, the space between these two formers, with 3M aluminum tape. We're using the wide stuff so it'll span over top of both of those formers. So moving on to the flaps are very much like the elevator servos on the Skymasters. So that receiver that's in there right above my thumb, that's a coated metal piece. That one I was just showing you wasn't prepped off. This one had a piece of tape over it, so there's a better shot right there. Now, the part that actually goes into there is this ball right here. Now, it's actually a really great system, the way this all works. I will put the servo in the fuselage and show you. So servo goes in like this, gets screwed in from the back. You can see there what it looks like when we've got our servo installed. So it works really nice with these MKS servos. Then, our servo arm, of course, sits on the servo itself, and this gets installed on our arm. Now, if you're using an arm that's any thicker than this or has a different profile, like the actual arm piece is closer to the servo, there's not going to be enough room for this nut. The nut goes on the back side. That just clears the fuselage, or it's going to be maybe touching the fuselage, and then we'll have to put probably a spacer on the outside of this guy. But that is, I think, a really good system, and I think that's the perfect arm for this. This is just my test setup arm. All right, so flapper-on arms are created. I tried a couple different combinations here. I tried the MKS hubs with arms, tried the Electron ones, and basically the ones that actually work the best are the MKS carbon arms. So we need a nut on the base for a spacer, and then we put a nut on the back side, of course, with Loctite and everything, and this just works out perfect, I think. As far as the design goes, I think it's going to work great. Now, the one interesting thing with the Skymaster F-16, when you put these wings on and off, you need to take the flaps off. So there's not enough room in the root of the wing here for that flap just to slide on. It fits beautifully in this pocket, but you can't just slide it on, and you don't want to start grinding this down, because in order for that just to slide on, you'd actually need to grind down material all the way to the black line, which would be ridiculous. So what happens, there's a video online of Skymaster showing this. You pull the hinge pin out of the end, flap comes off, goes on, and that's why it sits in the arm on the servo. So this servo has now been fastened in place. We still need to install our other servo in place, but everything looks like it should line up great. And then if we take this arm, install it on our flap here. There we go. And when that's screwed down, we have got just a little gap between the nut and the fuselage. So that is perfect spacing. Okay, so now with both of our servos, flapper-on servos installed, our horns are not installed. And that's because we want to make sure that we plug this guy in, get it centered, then we'll fasten our horns onto the surface. Okay, so we got both of our arms installed here. Now, the way our system is mixed on the jetty, I'll show you specifically on the jetty, but we've got flapper-on control. Now, these limits aren't set at all. And then we've got our flap control. So that's flaps, takeoff flaps, and off. So the way this is programmed in the radio is we've got ailerons 1 and 2. So those are programmed as ailerons. Elevators is elevons. You can see here when we add our aileron control, our elevators are moving a little bit and our ailerons are also moving. So that is how that functions. And then when we go to mix in flaps, we've got our flight mode switch right there. And then what happens is we go to fine tuning, butterfly flap menu, And then we just go in here and we adjust our ailerons. So if I use our flight mode switch, you can see there and there, and even with at full flaps, we still have aileron control. So that is how it's all mixed in the Jetty radio. So with those servos installed, we can now finalize everything in this area. So we've got to do our wire extensions for the flap servos, get those run with the rest of the wires, and then we can start worrying about protecting our wires and running everything forward. So there's the mess right now, how it looks. It's a lot of stuff. Let's clean that up. All right, and additionally, we got our bunks set up yesterday, installed in the tank, so those are done in there. All of our fittings and everything are done. We put our Tygon over top of these tanks. We had them pressurized overnight, and they held pressure, so everything is good with the smoke tanks, 100% complete, ready to install in the fuselage. All right, so we've got all of our keepers installed there. Now, one thing I'll do with the keepers is get them glued in or get them fastened with the supplied tape. So the double-sided tape that's on there is like 3M tape. And then I'll go back and I will put some shoe goop on all of the clips. They will hold, but not for very long. So that's why the shoe goop's quite important, because the shoe goop basically encapsulates the clip and it won't come off ever unless you really want it to. So we've got our wires and our tubes and everything split. So we've got some of our surfaces coming down one side, some coming down the other side. And the reason I'm splitting them like that is just so we don't have one massive bundle. We can split these up, probably put them through that former right there. We'll have some fireproof material for this section to this section here where it comes beside the turbine. So that's the point of that, and we're going to get that fireproof material installed over all of our items now. And I've also done the shoe goop trick in the back here, so all of our keepers for our tubes and everything, just put some shoe goop on there. Now these things, we've got lots of clearance around the pipe. That's the important thing, is clearance. You don't want anything to ever come loose and touch the pipe, so that's why we have secured everything in the back end. All right, so there is our fireproof material. We've got a nice big section of heavy heat shrink. I'll show you what that is. The fireproof material coming through this hole in the former, and this is how we're going to route everything. So that's going to be out of the way. We'll put a clip on the side of this tank, but that's going to basically be tucked out of the way and have a nice space between the engine and this material. So that should work perfect. This is the material that we're using. So this is fireproof material, sheathing I think it's called. You can get it on Amazon, that's where I get it. It's quite expensive. So I buy it in the roll. It takes a while to show up here, but you can buy it in the roll, two different thicknesses that I found it. And I think it's like $5 a foot or something like that. So it's fairly expensive stuff, but it works really well. And then the heat shrink that I use is this stuff right here. So it's very, very thick material. Takes quite a bit of heat to shrink it. And then, I don't know if this will show up, but it's got adhesive on the inside. So once it's melted, it really doesn't go anywhere and it won't let go unless you want it to. So that's how I do it. Okay, so we've got both of our fireproof sheathings installed. We've got everything set up there. One other little addition that I did here is our brake lines come to a T right in this location. So I just took some foil tape that we used in the back end, put a couple layers over top of those air lines. Nothing's fastened down, they're just all kind of glued together in a bundle. And that's just to provide some thermal protection between the bell mouth that's going to sit there and those lines. So the back end of this aircraft is essentially complete, ready to go as far as all the lines go. So I think what the next thing we can do here is we can start thinking about getting our pipe installed. So we have our holes drilled in our pipe, and we need to drill our holes in our former work here. All right, so progressively moving our way forward, we've got our smoke tanks installed here. Put a little piece of foam on the back side. On this one, I put it on the front side, and we've got some pre-plumbed lines on our smoke tanks. There's not great access to the vent fittings on those tanks, so I've put my one line going in between my two tanks, because this tank is going to fill first, come out the vent, fill up this tank, and then this yellow vent is going to go outside the aircraft. So I've done those guys up, and we've got good access to our bung fittings. Now, going through this progressively, Next thing we have to worry about is our lines going to our wings. Now, fortunately, the wings on this aircraft are quite simple. We've got a slat or leading edge servo, which is about here, and then we've got a 2-wire line coming to our missile rails on the wingtips. So essentially, there's only 5 wires. We'll use a 6-pin Ashlock connector in the wing, and we've got 2 points here where they can tuck in. But we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, because if we can't run our wires with our smoke tanks in the way, we need to account for that. So I'm going to do a hole right here and see if we can fish our wires forward. I believe there's going to be room beside the smoke tank and stuff, because there's a fair bit of room on the top side of that the tank, between the tank and the fuselage. All right, so I got my wires done up here for the wings. Now this is nice and simple, because we have, like I said, the one single servo wire and the light wire. And I found this super skinny snake skin at our local Princess Auto. I actually ordered it all from across Canada. I cleaned out a lot of the stores. Works great for a scenario like this, where you've got 2 of these thin runs of power box wire. So anyways, this is what's going to go through the through fitting in the wing, or in the fuselage to the wing. And this is going to protect the wires as it runs by the smoke tank and fuel tank and former work. And then what we do is we have one of our small little through fittings here. These are the 3/4 millimeter through fittings, and they go like this. And then that through fitting gets glued into the fuselage, and this is the little piece of wire that is sticking out. So it works really nice. All right, so just putting our connectors together here, we're using Ashlock connectors, which is what we basically use on pretty much everything. There's a couple of reasons we use the Ashlock connectors. One of them is when you're using the Ashlock connector on the wing side. So this one as an example, there's pins here. So you can simply take a servo lead, plug it into the wing, and you can operate each of the servos individually. So I love these connectors for that reason. So that also brings up something that we've been thinking about and working on preparing here at the lighter side of RC, and that is our masterclass. So we've never done it yet as of recording this video, but it's something that somebody brought up, and I thought it was a great idea, and I figured we are going to gauge interest from you guys, the viewers. So if you are interested in learning more about the masterclass, best thing to do is shoot me an email, thelightersideofrc@gmail.com, and I'll add you to the list of people that will be contacted when the masterclass course is released. So what is the masterclass course? Basically, it's going to be a 1.5-day course here at the shop, so you have to fly to Canada, and we are basically going to cover topics that the attendees, so you guys, want to know about. So there's been a few people that have emailed me, and they're wondering about connecting or crimping servo connectors, just like we're doing. So we may spend an hour, half an hour, doing hands-on stuff, all based on crimping servo connectors. The theory behind it all is to cover the items that you guys want to see, and we will provide lunch on the Saturday. It'll be a full day Saturday. Who knows what will happen in the evening, and then Sunday will be a half day on Sunday. So we'll probably do it in springtime here coming up, and the whole point of that is, so if you want to spend a little bit of extra time in Canada, taking a vacation or whatever, it is a beautiful place to explore in the spring and summertime. So there's our connector. And again, if you are interested, please shoot me an email, thelightersideofrc@gmail.com. And what I'll do is I'll add you to the list, and as soon as we've kind of got the details laid out, dates and prices and everything, you'll be the first one to hear about it, or the first group to hear about it. So thelightersideofrc@gmail.com, just simply say I'm interested in the course information, and I'll add you to the list. All right, so first drop-in test fit of the engine with the pipe installed and everything. We are looking pretty darn good. So every installation is a little bit different, so I can't really give you some generalizations here, but when you look at the pipe here, I've got a roll of tape underneath, so we're sitting fairly level on the pipe. And then if we look down the exhaust, The engine's sitting just a little bit high. It's actually acceptable. Like we're maybe 2 millimeters high on the engine or low on the pipe. So what we're going to do is we're going to just pop our engine out, and we're going to take our L brackets there where the pipe's mounted to, or that are mounted to the pipe, and give those just a little bit of a bend. So that's going to raise the pipe up just a smidgen. There's really not a whole lot of adjustment that we need to do. It's a couple millimeters. So we're going to pop the engine back out and get that done. All right, so that little adjustment on the pipe and the engine brought everything perfectly in line. So that is wonderful. Last thing to do in the tail section here is the exhaust cone afterburner setup. We are going to wrap up video number 4 in the F16 build series right here. So we finished recording today's video on a Saturday, and this Saturday just happens to be a After Dark Saturday. What's After Dark? Well, it's a completely separate channel. We do live streams here from the shop, usually every 2 weeks for about 2 hours. You guys get to see all the behind the scenes stuff. We work on stuff weeks before it actually comes out in video. So I encourage you to check it out. If you're not a subscriber of the After Dark channel, it's another channel, and it's tons of fun. Best thing about After Dark for me is you guys get to interact during the After Dark session if you're watching it live, and I can see what you're asking, questions, answer. It's tons of fun. So definitely encourage you to check it out. Thanks guys for watching video number 4, and we'll see you in the next video.